Asterisk, asterisk. The boardroom was filled with tense whispers, a place where million-dollar deals were made with a handshake, but today, a storm was brewing. The door swung open, and a man in casual attire walked in. His presence went unnoticed, not because he wasn't important, but because he intentionally chose to blend in, choosing not to wear the usual suit or flashy accessories that screamed wealth. Dressed in a simple blue shirt and jeans, he wasn't what anyone expected to see. The room, filled with executives in tailored suits, barely spared him a glance as he made his way to the back of the room. A manager, tall and sharp-eyed, noticed him and immediately crossed the room with a smirk. She didn't know who he was. She didn't care. "You don't belong here," she snapped, her voice cold, her eyes scanning him up and down dismissively. "This meeting is for executives only. Security, remove him immediately," she commanded with a sense of superiority. What she didn't know was that the man she was dismissing was the one holding the $300 million deal that could make or break the company. His name, Marcus Carter, CEO of Horizon Enterprises and owner of the very firm she worked for. Her words hung in the air as he calmly raised an eyebrow, not moving an inch. His mind raced with memories of every slight, every moment he'd been looked down upon simply for his appearance. But today, that was going to change. In the next few minutes, everything would shift, and she would wish she had never spoken. But for now, he remained silent, his calm demeanor masking the storm building inside him. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. "What's the deal with this guy?" one of the younger executives whispered to another, noticing the tension. They couldn't understand why the manager was so confident. To them, he was just another unremarkable visitor in jeans, an outsider. But Marcus Carter wasn't an outsider. He owned this company. He controlled this deal, and in just a moment, they would all know it. He picked up his phone and texted his assistant, "Activate Protocol 6. This was about to get interesting. The manager, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, stood in front of him, arms crossed, waiting for him to leave. She was so sure of herself, so sure of her position, that she failed to notice the other executives who were starting to glance at Marcus, intrigued by his unassuming presence. Her voice cut through the tension. "Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out," she said, a smug smile playing on her lips. But Marcus didn't budge. He wasn't going anywhere. The seconds ticked by, thick with the weight of her words. "I'm not leaving," he said simply, his voice steady, unwavering. The room fell silent. The eyes of the other executives shifted from the manager to Marcus, then back to each other, confusion and doubt starting to take root. They were beginning to realize something was off. The manager's smile faltered for just a second, but it was enough to show her uncertainty. Marcus stood his ground. His calmness was disarming, and his silence more powerful than any words. The storm had started, and with it, the end of her reign of authority in this room. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The door to the boardroom opened again, and another security guard walked in, clearly summoned by the manager's orders. But as he stepped toward Marcus, his face froze. He recognized Marcus from the company's annual report, from the high-profile acquisitions he had overseen, the moves he'd made that had put Horizon Enterprises on the map. Marcus was the man who had made the company what it was today. The guard hesitated, looking between Marcus and the manager. "You're not going to remove him, are you?" the guard asked, his voice cautious. The manager's confidence was quickly crumbling, but she refused to back down. "Yes, I am," she snapped, but the guard remained still, his eyes not leaving Marcus. "Not today," he finally said, stepping aside. The other executives were watching, their faces now painted with realization. They could no longer ignore the fact that this man was important. He wasn't just a bystander, he was their boss. The woman who had been so sure of herself just moments ago now found herself standing at the crossroads of her own arrogance. She had no idea who Marcus Carter really was, and soon she would learn that lesson the hard way. The power dynamics in this room were about to shift, and it wasn't going to be pretty. But it wasn't about the confrontation anymore. It was about making a point, about showing the world that you don't need to scream to have power. Marcus smiled faintly as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his business card and placing it on the table. "I'm not here to make a scene," he said softly, but the words were sharper than any weapon. "But I suggest you look up who I am, because I own this place, and you've just made a big mistake." The silence that followed was deafening, and the weight of his words sank in, leaving the manager and the entire room frozen in disbelief. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The room was tense, every eye on Marcus as he stood there, calm, unwavering, in the middle of the storm he hadn't planned for but was prepared to face. The manager, her face now flushed with frustration, crossed her arms and glared at him, but her earlier confidence had evaporated into something much darker, an uneasy panic. She had made a mistake she could already feel slipping from her grip like sand through fingers. The other executives, still seated at the long conference table, exchanged looks of disbelief. They had all heard of Marcus Carter, of course. His name was well known in the industry, but no one had ever expected to see him in such an unassuming manner. He wasn't the type of person who made a scene, who demanded attention. But now, they were all wondering, asterisk, who is this man? Asterisk. And more importantly, asterisk, what is he going to do next? Asterisk. The manager, still trying to regain control, cleared her throat. I've already called security. I'm giving you one last chance. Leave, or we will have no choice but to remove you. Her voice shook slightly, betraying her composure, but she pressed on, unwilling to admit her mistake just yet. Marcus raised an eyebrow and glanced at the security guard who had hesitated moments before. The guard, once standing at attention, now took a step back, his posture shifting from authority to uncertainty. He could feel the room turning. The weight of Marcus's silence was heavier than any command he could give. "You know," Marcus said, his voice even, but the power behind it undeniable, "it's a pity when people mistake the appearance of power for real power. You've been looking at me, trying to measure me by what I'm wearing, by my presence, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I suggest you take a moment and reassess your choices before they cost you more than you can afford." The manager's jaw tightened, but her defiant stare wavered for the briefest of moments. It was a crack in her armor, one Marcus had been waiting for. She didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. And then, just as Marcus expected, the CEO of a competing company, who had been quietly observing from across the table, finally spoke up. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice slow but deliberate. "I think we all need to step back for a moment." The room quieted even further as everyone turned their attention to him. "Marcus, is it?" he asked. Marcus gave a simple nod, his expression unchanged. The CEO continued, his tone now softening. "I think we've all misjudged the situation here. We're in a meeting about a multi-million-dollar deal. I've worked with Marcus Carter before. I know what he's capable of, and I'm sure the rest of us here would benefit from knowing as well." The manager looked like she had been slapped. Her face flushed even redder, and for a moment, she looked as though she might choke on the words she was about to say. "You can't be serious," she muttered, barely audible. But the damage had already been done. Marcus wasn't just a name in the industry. He was the deal-maker, the one who had secured billions for the company, the one who could turn a company from bankruptcy into success with a single phone call. The room began to stir with the realization. Executives who had once been skeptical now shifted their gaze, some leaning forward in their seats, some pulling out their phones to double-check their own research. One by one, the power dynamics in the room shifted. No one dared speak. They didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. Finally, the security guard who had been standing off to the side made his move. He walked up to the manager and placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. But there was a shift in the energy. The room wasn't the same. The guard's hand wasn't offering comfort anymore. It was a mark of finality. The manager looked at him, her eyes wide with panic. She turned back to Marcus, a new layer of fear creeping into her expression. I didn't know," she stammered, but the words felt hollow, as though she was desperately trying to recover from a blow that had already landed. Marcus smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It was a smile of acknowledgement. He had played the long game, and now the pieces were falling into place. "It's all right," he said, his voice calm, but it cut through the tension in the room. "It's not about what you know. It's about what you choose to ignore, and you chose to ignore me." The manager stood frozen, her body rigid with frustration. She had never imagined that the man she had tried to belittle was the very person who could make or break this company. She had underestimated him, and now there was no turning back. Marcus turned to face the other executives, his posture commanding yet calm. I won't raise my voice, he said, his tone steady, because I don't need to. But I will make sure you all understand something today. Respect is earned. Power is not something you simply take. It's something that is built, piece by piece, with hard work and integrity. I've spent years building what you now see in front of you, and I won't let anyone take that away from me, not even you. With those words, the power in the room was no longer up for debate. The manager's eyes darted from face to face, and the silence grew heavier. She could feel the weight of her mistake pressing down on her, suffocating her. The moment she had hoped to control had slipped completely out of her hands, and all she could do was stand there, paralyzed by the realization that Marcus Carter was not just a man. He was the embodiment of everything she had never understood. The room finally began to shift. The once dominant manager was now the one on the outside looking in, and Marcus stood in the center, the unchallenged force of power that no one had seen coming. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The tension in the room continued to build as the manager stood frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the conference table, her breath shallow, every move she made now feeling calculated. The executives around her, once silent observers, were now starting to shift in their seats, some uneasy, others fidgeting, and a few already looking away in discomfort. Marcus stood tall in the center of the room, his calm demeanor radiating a power that had taken years to cultivate. He wasn't just a CEO, he was the product of every insult, every slight, and every moment he had been underestimated throughout his career. It was in those moments that he had built his empire, piece by piece. And now, as he looked around the room, he realized that every one of these people had just been reminded of that fact. The manager, now visibly shaken, cleared her throat, her voice faltering as she tried once again to regain control. "You have no right to treat me like this," she said, her words weak, as if they were the last defense she had left. "I am just doing my job." Marcus's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in disbelief. This wasn't about her job, it was about respect. "You've been doing your job, all right," he replied, his voice unwavering. "But you've been doing it wrong. For years, you've been dismissing people like me, people who don't fit your narrow view of what power looks like." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And now, you're about to pay for it." The room was silent, save for the faint sound of someone nervously adjusting their chair. It was in that silence that Marcus made his move. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and began typing. No one knew exactly what he was doing, but the stillness in the air told them that whatever it was important. The manager, still trying to regain her composure, took a step forward. "If you think you can just walk in here and get away with this, you're wrong," she said, her voice rising. "I will make sure you're removed from this company. I'll make sure you never work again." Marcus glanced up from his phone, locking eyes with her. His expression remained unchanged, but the words that came next were as sharp as any blade. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said. The words echoed in the room, and for a moment, it seemed as if the very air had been sucked out of the space. Everyone, even the security guards, who had been standing silently in the corner, turned their attention to him. Marcus stood tall, his voice steady and unyielding. "I'm not the man you think I am. I'm not someone you can just dismiss or push aside. I own this company. This whole room," he added, his gaze sweeping across the executives, "is under my watch. And if you think you can play me like one of your pawns, you're sorely mistaken." The manager's face drained of color. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but the words never came. The silence between them grew even heavier, more suffocating. For the first time in the entire meeting, she realized she was the one who was out of her depth. Marcus wasn't just a man with a title, he was a force. "I'm not going to raise my voice," he said, his tone still calm, "because I don't need to, but you will answer for your actions." The room remained silent. The executives, who had been uncertain of their own positions just moments before, now knew where the power lay. They had all been complicit in the silence, in the dismissals, in the refusal to acknowledge the worth of someone because of their appearance or background. But now, that silence was breaking. "You think you can just fire people like me, humiliate them in front of everyone, and get away with it?" Marcus continued, his eyes fixed on the manager. "I've seen it happen too many times. People like me, people who don't fit your image of what success looks like, being told they don't belong. But I'm done with that. This ends today." Marcus looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each executive. each one who had watched in silence. All of you have stood by and allowed this to happen. You've watched people like me be dismissed, passed over, and humiliated. But you're not innocent. You're complicit. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions. The silence in the room was deafening. The manager stood motionless, her face flushed with anger, but there was nothing she could do now. Her words, her authority, everything she had tried to build in this room, had crumbled in the face of a power much greater than her own. Marcus, his calmness unbroken, finally took a step toward the door. "I'm done here," he said simply. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." As he walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing behind him, the silence remained. The executives, now fully aware of who Marcus Carter was and what he was capable of, exchanged nervous glances. There was no more doubt. There was no more pretending. The man they had just tried to dismiss was the one who held the real power. And they all knew, without a doubt, that their world was about to change. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The moment Marcus left the room, a strange calm settled in, but it was a calm that felt like the quiet before a storm. The executives sat still, their eyes locked on the empty door through which he had just exited, none of them daring to speak, yet each of them feeling the weight of his presence lingering like an oppressive fog. For the first time, they understood the magnitude of the mistake they had just made. The manager, who had been so confident moments ago, now stood at the head of the table, her face pale, her arms crossed defensively, her mind racing. She had underestimated him, and in doing so, she had revealed not just her own ignorance, but the collective ignorance of everyone who had failed to acknowledge Marcus for who he truly was. The room, once filled with the hum of corporate conversation, was now silent, as though each person present was waiting for the world to shift on its axis. The power dynamic had completely flipped, and there was no denying it. The manager's eyes flickered nervously toward the door, and then to the other executives. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. The question hung in the air, but no one had an answer. The young CEO from the competing company, who had spoken up earlier, leaned forward in his seat, his face betraying a mix of awe and disbelief. "You've made a mistake," he said simply, his voice low but certain. "A big one." His words were a knife to the manager's already fragile ego. The realization that she had just made a critical error in judgment seemed to hit her all at once. It was the kind of mistake that couldn't be undone, the kind of mistake that would haunt her for the rest of her career. And it was all because of Marcus Carter, a man she had dismissed without a second thought. The other executives exchanged glances, their faces etched with uncertainty, fear, and something else, guilt. They had all stood by while she had belittled Marcus, but now they all knew better. They all knew the kind of man Marcus was, and they knew just how much power he held. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from corporate arrogance to something much more raw, a realization of their own complicity. "How could we have missed it?" one of the senior executives murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "How could we not see it?" The manager swallowed hard, trying to regain some semblance of control. "We need to fix this," she muttered, but there was no real conviction in her voice. She knew it was too late for that. Marcus was gone, but his presence had left a permanent mark on the room, on the company, and on everyone in it. Meanwhile, Marcus was in his office, sitting quietly behind his desk, a calm smile playing at the corners of his lips. His assistant, Carla, stood at the door, watching him with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. "Are we really going to do this?" she asked, her voice soft. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed a number, his finger hovering over the screen for a moment as he considered his next move. He knew that the real power in the company wasn't in the hands of the executives who played their petty games of status. It was in the hands of those who built the empire, those who could take everything away with just one phone call. He needed to remind them of that. After a few rings, the line clicked, and a voice answered. "Mr. Carter?" It was the voice of his lawyer. "I need you to prepare a full audit of the company's recent activities," Marcus said, his voice steady, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. "I'm activating Protocol 6. We're going to make sure everyone involved in this mess is held accountable." Carla raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Are you really going to take them down like that?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Marcus looked up from his phone and met her gaze. "If they want to play this game, then I'll show them how it's done," he said. "No one humiliates me like that and gets away with it. Not on my watch. He stood up from his desk, his expression hardening. Make the calls. Get the paperwork ready. Carla nodded and left the office, already making the necessary arrangements. Marcus turned back to his desk, his mind running through the events of the day. He wasn't just angry. He was done. He was done with the people who thought they could dismiss him, done with the system that allowed them to do so. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to get to where he was, and he would not let anyone take that away from him. He knew this was just the beginning. There were bigger things to come. As the hours passed, the atmosphere in the office began to change. Executives who had once walked around with a sense of entitlement now moved cautiously, their steps measured, as though they were afraid of being caught in the crossfire. They knew that Marcus was capable of making them disappear with a single phone call. And for the first time, they realized just how fragile their positions really were. It wasn't just the manager who was on the chopping block. It was everyone who had enabled the system that allowed her to thrive at the expense of others. The ripple effect of Marcus's actions was already being felt throughout the company, and it was only a matter of time before the full extent of his power would become clear to everyone. Meanwhile, the manager sat alone in her office, her hands shaking as she stared at her phone. She had just received the first of many emails, a notice of an internal audit. She didn't know it yet, but her days in this position were numbered. The email wasn't just a warning, it was the beginning of the end. Marcus Carter had made his move, and there was no turning back. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The next morning, the ripple effect of Marcus's actions began to spread throughout the company with an intensity no one had anticipated. It started with an email, a simple internal memo sent to every employee, every executive, with a subject line that read, asterisk internal audit, immediate action required, asterisk. The moment it landed in their inboxes, the atmosphere in the office shifted. People who had once walked through the halls with a sense of power now walked with their heads down, unsure of what was coming next. The manager, who had once carried herself with authority, sat alone in her office, staring at the email in disbelief. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the message. She had hoped it would be a routine check, just another part of company protocol. But as she read the detailed instructions, it became clear that this was no ordinary audit. Marcus Carter had made sure of that. His lawyer, along with a team of forensic auditors, had been brought in to examine every transaction, every decision, every piece of paperwork that could tie her actions and those of her colleagues to any form of misconduct. The audit wasn't just about financial discrepancies, it was about accountability, about uncovering the truth behind the power structures that allowed someone like Marcus to be belittled in the first place. As the hours passed, the news spread. Some executives tried to act unaffected, pushing forward with their meetings as if everything were normal. But there was no escaping the tension. In every corner of the building, whispers started, and soon, the conversation shifted from corporate strategy to survival. Everyone was wondering the same thing. Asterisk, who would be next? Asterisk. Meanwhile, Marcus had left the office, but he wasn't idle. He spent the day at home, reflecting on the events that had transpired and on his next steps. He knew that the audit would expose everything, the systemic issues, the bias, the discrimination that had been allowed to fester unchecked for years. But he wasn't just seeking retribution. He was seeking change. He wanted to make sure that no one, especially those who thought they could dismiss him because of his appearance, would ever have the chance to do so again. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he wasn't going to let a few misguided individuals bring it down. As the day wore on, the calls began. One by one, key figures in the company were summoned to a conference room where Marcus's legal team, armed with the results of the audit, was ready to lay everything bare. The first to be called in was the manager. She walked into the room with her head held high, trying to maintain some semblance of control, but it was clear that the power dynamic had shifted. She took a seat, her palms sweating as she waited for the inevitable. The lead attorney for Marcus, a woman with sharp eyes and an unshakable confidence, stood in front of her. "We've gone over the records," the attorney said, her voice calm but firm. "And we've found evidence of several instances of misconduct. You've violated company policies, and it's clear that you've treated people based on your own biases. This is unacceptable." The manager's face drained of color, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, she had nothing to say. The attorney continued, "You're not just being held accountable for your actions here, you're being held accountable for a system that you've perpetuated. a system that allows people to be treated unfairly based on their race, their appearance, their status. And that's something we're going to change. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The manager's eyes welled with tears, but she remained silent. She knew she couldn't argue. The evidence was overwhelming. The room had become a courtroom, and she was the one on trial. As the session continued, more executives were called in, each one facing the same fate. They had been part of a system that had allowed the manager's behavior to go unchecked. They had all turned a blind eye, accepting the status quo because it benefited them. But now, the world was changing. The audit was revealing not just financial misconduct, but a pattern of favoritism, exclusion, and systemic bias that had been quietly destroying the company from within. By the time the last executive had been called in, the power structure in the company had shifted completely. There were no longer whispers of doubt or disbelief. Marcus Carter had done what no one else dared to do. He had taken control. He had shown them all that power didn't just lie in titles or positions. It lay in the ability to make people understand that their actions had consequences. As the final meeting wrapped up, Marcus's voice came through the speakerphone, calm and unyielding. "You've all been given a choice," he said, his words carrying the weight of authority. "You can either stand with me and help build something better, or you can leave. But understand this. The old way is over. You can't push people aside anymore. Not me, not anyone. This company will be different." The silence in the room was deafening. The executives knew what that meant. There would be no going back. Marcus had made sure of it. As the last of the meetings came to a close, the manager sat in her office, surrounded by papers and files, knowing her time was up. The company she had once ruled was no longer hers to control. Marcus had taken it piece by piece, and now it was his. And there was nothing she could do to stop him. The final email notification came through. Asterisk internal memo. Immediate termination. Effective immediately. Asterisk. The words were clear, and the reality had sunk in. Her reign was over. And Marcus Carter? He was just getting started. Asterisk. 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 The next day, as the company continued to feel the shockwaves of Marcus's actions, a new atmosphere settled over the office. What had once been a bustling hub of corporate competition and self-assurance now felt like a somber place. The energy was different. Gone was the air of superiority that had once flowed freely through the executive floors. Now, everyone was on edge, unsure of where they stood, and more importantly, unsure of where Marcus stood. He had not only shifted the power dynamic in the company, but he had reshaped the entire culture. News of the audit and its consequences spread like wildfire, sparking conversations in every department. Employees who had once feared speaking up now found their voices. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the company for so long began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of anticipation. Marcus had shown them that it was possible to challenge the status quo, to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The manager, now in a state of disbelief, sat in her office, staring at the termination letter that had been placed on her desk. Her world had crumbled in just 24 hours. What was once hers was now gone, and there was nothing she could do about it. She had fought to maintain control, but Marcus had dismantled her authority piece by piece with calculated precision. She had misjudged him, but it wasn't just that. She had underestimated the power of accountability. She had allowed herself to believe that her position was unassailable, that the system she had worked within was invincible. But Marcus had proven that it wasn't. As she stared at the letter, the weight of her actions settled in. She had played the game for too long, and now the consequences were hers to face. Across town, Marcus sat in his office, surrounded by files, phone calls, and meetings, but his mind was focused on something else. He had always known that his journey would be difficult, that he would face opposition, but what surprised him the most was how easily the system had been taken down once he had set his mind to it. It wasn't just about power or money, it was about integrity. He had built his company on a foundation of hard work, respect, and a commitment to equality. Now, he was building something new, something better. His assistant, Carla, entered the room, a stack of papers in her hands. "The audit results came in," she said, setting the papers on his desk. Marcus didn't look up at first. He knew what was inside. He had already been briefed on the initial findings. But this was the final piece of the puzzle. The system was broken, and it was time to rebuild. Carla stood silently, waiting for his response. He looked up, meeting her gaze with a slight smile. "Let's make the necessary calls," he said calmly. "It's time to move forward." Marcus had always known that change didn't come easy. It took effort, perseverance, and the willingness to face the truth head-on. But now, he saw the fruits of that labor beginning to blossom. The foundation of the company would be stronger than ever. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating a space where people from all walks of life could thrive, where talent was recognized, not dismissed based on appearance or preconceived notions. "I want to meet with the new leadership team," Marcus said as he reached for his phone. "We're going to discuss the future of this company, and it starts today." He dialed the number, his expression hardening as he spoke into the receiver. The message was clear. Asterisk, "We're not going to allow the past to dictate our future." Asterisk, meanwhile, the manager, now resigned to her fate, had begun clearing out her office. The walls that had once been adorned with plaques and accolades now stood bare, a symbol of the empire she had once built but had ultimately destroyed with her own arrogance. She had allowed herself to believe that she was untouchable, that her position in the company was invincible. But Marcus had proven that no one, no matter their title or status, was beyond reproach. She packed up her things slowly, the weight of the realization hitting her in waves. She had been blind to the system she had helped perpetuate, blind to the voices of those she had pushed aside in her climb to the top. As she walked out of her office for the final time, she passed by the conference room where Marcus had once been dismissed. The table that had once served as the battleground for so many corporate wars now seemed almost insignificant. It was a reminder of how quickly power could shift, how easily the tables could turn. The message was clear. Marcus was no longer the man who could be pushed around. He was the man who controlled the future. Back at the headquarters, the new leadership team gathered in the conference room, and for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of hope in the air. Marcus had chosen them not because of their titles, but because of their values, their commitment to integrity, and their belief in what the company could become. As they sat around the table, Marcus spoke first. "This company is no longer about status. It's about people. It's about creating a culture of respect, a culture where everyone, regardless of their background or appearance, is given the chance to succeed." The room fell silent as his words settled in. They all understood. The company's future was no longer about profits and power alone. It was about building something that would last, something that would set a new standard in the industry. Marcus had shown them what true leadership looked like, not just the ability to make decisions, but the ability to inspire, to lead with purpose. The rest of the day passed quickly, with phone calls, meetings, and plans being set into motion. The future was being shaped before their eyes, and it was nothing like the past they had known. The company was changing, evolving, and with Marcus at the helm, it was heading toward a new dawn, one where fairness, integrity, and accountability would be the driving forces. As the sun set that evening, the lights in the office building flickered out, leaving only the soft hum of the city outside. But in that silence, there was a feeling of something more, something powerful, something unstoppable. Marcus Carter had not only changed the course of a company, but he had changed the narrative. He had shown the world that power wasn't about who you were, it was about what you stood for. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Days passed, and the company began to settle into a new rhythm, one dictated by Marcus's vision. The changes were felt at every level. What had once been a corporate hierarchy fueled by status, power plays, and discrimination was now evolving into something more inclusive, more focused on the potential of every individual, regardless of their background. Marcus's leadership had shifted the foundation of the company from one of exclusivity to one of opportunity. He wasn't interested in maintaining the status quo. He wanted to break it apart and rebuild it from the ground up. His vision was clear. Asterisk, a company where talent, hard work, and integrity were the only currencies that mattered. Asterisk. As the days went by, the company's new leadership team, chosen carefully by Marcus for their shared values, worked tirelessly to implement the changes they knew were necessary. They held meetings with every department, introducing new policies, creating mentorship programs, and focusing on diversity and inclusion at all levels. They began creating a more transparent system for promotions, ensuring that everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or socioeconomic background had a fair shot at advancing. Marcus had given them the tools, but it was up to them to carry the weight of his vision forward. The first major milestone came when Marcus announced the creation of an employee resource group dedicated to addressing issues of racial and social inequality within the company. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a tangible commitment to making a real difference. The group would be empowered to speak openly about the challenges faced by underrepresented groups within the company, and more importantly, to find solutions. It wasn't enough for Marcus to simply have the conversation. He wanted to make sure the conversation was backed by action. He knew that a company could only truly change if it created space for everyone to voice their concerns and work together toward solutions. As the employee resource group got off the ground, the impact was immediate. Employees began to feel heard, and many shared stories of how they had once felt overlooked or excluded. The company culture started to shift, not just from the top down, but from the bottom up. Marcus's vision had been clear. Asterisk, change starts with us, with every single person who steps through the door. Asterisk. But despite the progress, there was still a great deal of work to be done. Not everyone was on board with the changes, and Marcus knew that. There were still whispers in the hallways, behind closed doors, among those who had benefited from the old system and felt threatened by the new direction. But Marcus wasn't concerned. He had already faced much greater challenges than a few disgruntled executives. He had built his career by rising above the noise, and he wasn't about to let anything stop him now. One evening, as Marcus sat in his office reviewing the latest reports, he received a call from his lawyer. The message was brief, but it carried the weight of an impending storm. The former manager, the one who had been dismissed after Marcus's audit, was preparing to fight back. She had already hired a high-powered legal team and was planning to take the matter to court. Marcus wasn't surprised. He had expected this. People like her never went down quietly, but Marcus was prepared. He had not only the evidence of her misconduct, but a network of allies and supporters who believed in the new direction of the company. More than that, he had the truth on his side. As the court date approached, Marcus knew that the case wasn't just about one individual. It was about sending a message to every person in the company who thought they could continue operating under the old rules. A message to the industry that the time for change had arrived. A message that no one, no matter their status or position, was beyond accountability. The case went to court, and the media attention was intense. Headlines splashed across news outlets, social media buzzed with discussions, and people from all corners of the business world took notice. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a battle for the soul of the company. The former manager's legal team tried to argue that she had been wrongfully terminated, that Marcus had acted inappropriately by forcing such swift and dramatic changes, but the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus's legal team presented the audit findings, the documented history of bias, and the systemic issues that had plagued the company for years. The manager's actions were exposed for what they truly were, a betrayal of the values Marcus was now instilling in the company. The case was swift, the verdict clear. The court ruled in Marcus's favor, and the manager was held accountable for her actions. But the true victory came when the ruling was announced publicly. Marcus addressed the media, his words measured, but his message firm. "This is just the beginning," he said. "This company will be a place where integrity, fairness, and respect are non-negotiable. We will not tolerate discrimination in any form, and we will hold ourselves accountable for the culture we create. This is not just about me. It's about all of us. Together, we will build something better." The impact of the ruling rippled through the company, and the industry took notice. Marcus had won more than just a legal battle. He had won the hearts and minds of the people who mattered most, his employees. The case had solidified his position as a leader who not only spoke about change, but who took the necessary steps to make it happen. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the company continued to evolve. The work wasn't over, but the foundation had been laid. Marcus had created a space where people could thrive, where they could feel seen, valued, and heard. And for the first time in a long time, the company wasn't just surviving, it was growing, it was changing, and it was leading by example. Marcus Carter had not only redefined what leadership looked like, he had redefined what success looked like. And in doing so, he had shown the world that true power lies not in control, but in the ability to lift others up. Months passed, and the company continued to evolve under Marcus's leadership. The changes were undeniable. The workplace, once an environment where status and appearances dictated opportunities, had transformed into a place where innovation and integrity were the true measures of success. The culture shift was palpable. Employees who had once felt silenced by the oppressive corporate structure now spoke up, their ideas heard, their voices valued. The impact was far-reaching. New initiatives aimed at fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion were not just being implemented, they were being embraced. Marcus had managed to create a culture where people of all backgrounds could thrive, where respect wasn't just a policy, but a practice. And still, the ripple effects of his leadership were felt throughout the industry. Competitors who had once ignored his rise now watched closely, acknowledging the changes he had made and the success that followed. But Marcus knew that while the company was thriving, the work was far from over. His vision had always been about more than just improving the company. It was about redefining what leadership could be. For him, leadership wasn't about control. It wasn't about dictating terms from the top. It was about empowering others, about ensuring that those who had been overlooked for far too long finally had a seat at the table. One afternoon, as he sat in his office reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, his phone rang. It was Carla, his assistant, calling with news. "Marcus," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of excitement. "There's someone here to see you. They say it's urgent. They're from a local community organization, and they want to talk about something that could be a big opportunity for the company." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Send them in," he said, his curiosity piqued. Moments later, a woman entered his office. She was in her early 40s, with a calm, focused demeanor. Her name was Maya, and she represented a local nonprofit dedicated to supporting underserved communities. She extended her hand with a firm handshake and introduced herself. "Mr. Carter, I've heard a lot about the changes you've made at your company. We've been following your work, and we believe there's an opportunity for us to partner." Marcus gestured for her to sit, his attention immediately focused on her. "Tell me more," he said, his tone welcoming but with the usual sharpness that came with his role. Maya began to explain how her organization had been working to create pathways for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to enter the workforce. They provided mentorship, job training, and educational opportunities. "But we've hit a wall," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "The resources are limited. We've been able to make a difference, but we could do so much more if we had the right partners. And from everything I've seen, your company has the kind of values that align with ours." Marcus listened intently, his mind already running through the possibilities. He had built his success on the principle that success wasn't just about profits, it was about impact. The idea of giving back, of creating opportunities for those who had been historically excluded from the corporate world, resonated deeply with him. After Maya finished outlining her organization's needs and goals, Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I'm intrigued," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "What kind of partnership are you looking for?" Maya smiled, clearly encouraged by his response. "We're looking for a sponsor, someone who can provide funding for our programs, yes, but more importantly, we need a company that will open its doors to our participants. We need businesses that are willing to take a chance on young people, especially those who come from marginalized communities, and give them real career opportunities. Your company could be a beacon for others to follow." Marcus's mind raced. This wasn't just about writing a check. This was about creating lasting change, about doing something that went beyond the walls of his company. This was about building bridges where there had once been barriers. "What if we do more than just sponsor?" Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. "What if we create a pipeline from your organization into our workforce? We can provide internships, apprenticeships, even mentorship programs. We'll not only provide funding, but we'll offer opportunities for these young people to actually build careers." Maya's eyes widened. "You'd be willing to do that?" Marcus nodded. "I believe in investing in people. I believe that talent can come from anywhere, and it's our job to make sure it's nurtured. If we're going to change the world, we need to start by giving others the chance to succeed. And we're going to do it in a way that reflects our values of equity, opportunity, and respect." Maya sat for a moment, processing what he had just said. Then, a smile spread across her face. "That would be incredible. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. It's exactly what we need." Marcus stood up, extending his hand. "Let's make it happen. We'll start working on the details, but this is just the beginning. Together, we're going to build something that's bigger than any of us." As they shook hands, Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. This was what it was all about: empowering others, creating opportunities where none existed before, and making sure that his success was shared. As Maya left his office, he sat back down and took a deep breath. This partnership wasn't just about changing his company, it was about changing lives. And Marcus knew that the impact of this decision would be felt for years to come. The future was wide open, and it was up to him and to everyone willing to join him to make the most of it. The work was never going to be easy, but Marcus had learned that true leadership wasn't just about taking charge, it was about taking action. It was about using your power to lift others up, and in doing so, lifting yourself and your company to new heights. The path ahead was still full of challenges, but Marcus was ready. The work was far from over, but he knew he was on the right path. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. As the partnership between Marcus's company and Maya's organization began to take shape, it quickly became clear that this was more than just a business deal. It was a movement. The first wave of participants from the nonprofit came to the office for their internship orientation, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They were young, eager, and full of potential, everything he had hoped for when he first envisioned this partnership. He watched as they entered the building, their eyes wide with both excitement and uncertainty. This was their first step into the corporate world, and for some of them, it was their first real job. But Marcus wasn't just providing them with an opportunity. He was giving them something far more valuable, a chance to prove themselves, a chance to show that talent, creativity, and drive didn't depend on where you came from, but on what you were willing to put into the work. The first few months were challenging, as expected. There were bumps along the way. Some of the participants struggled with the corporate environment, some with the pace, and some with self-doubt. But Marcus was patient. He knew it would take time for them to adjust, for them to build the confidence they needed to thrive in an environment that had never been built for them. One afternoon, as he walked through the open office space, he noticed one of the young women, a bright and ambitious intern named Jada, sitting at her desk, staring at her computer screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was trying to solve a problem for the marketing team, but it seemed like she was getting frustrated. Marcus walked over and paused by her desk. "How's it going?" he asked, his tone friendly but attentive. Jada looked up, her eyes widening when she saw him. She hadn't expected him to stop by her desk, and for a moment, she hesitated. "It's fine," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Just trying to figure out how to present these numbers in a way that makes sense. I feel like I'm missing something." Marcus smiled. "You're not missing anything," he said, sitting down next to her. "This is part of the learning process. It's okay to struggle a little. What's important is that you keep going. You've got the skills. You just need the confidence to trust yourself." Jada's expression softened slightly, but the doubt in her eyes was still there. "I don't want to mess it up," she admitted. "I don't want anyone to think I don't belong here." Marcus's smile grew. "You belong here because you're exactly who we need," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "It's not about being perfect. It's about learning, growing, and pushing yourself to do better every day. That's what we're all doing. So take a breath and show us what you can do." Jada looked at him, her shoulders relaxing as the weight of her self-doubt slowly lifted. "Thanks," she said quietly, the gratitude in her voice unmistakable. Marcus gave her a nod. "You've got this," he said before standing up and walking away. Over the next few weeks, Jada's confidence grew. She tackled projects with a new sense of purpose, and the team started noticing her contributions. Her ideas were sharp, her approach thoughtful, and her work ethic impressive. But it wasn't just her. Every single intern who had joined the company through the partnership started to make strides. Some were more reserved, others more outspoken, but they all found their footing, carving out their space in a corporate environment that hadn't been designed with them in mind. Marcus watched it all unfold with a sense of pride. He had given them a chance, but they had taken it and run with it. And that was the key. They were taking ownership of their futures, and the company was better for it. As time went on, Marcus saw how this change was affecting the entire organization. There was a renewed sense of excitement in the air, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. People were more engaged in their work, more willing to collaborate, and more eager to share their ideas. The old power structures that had once dominated the office were breaking down, replaced by a culture of openness, respect, and mutual support. The work was hard, and the road ahead was still long, but Marcus knew that they were on the right track. And as the first group of interns completed their programs and moved on to full-time positions, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. They had not only succeeded, they had thrived. This was the kind of future he had envisioned when he first took control of the company. But even as Marcus celebrated the success of his internship program, he knew that the battle wasn't over. There were still skeptics within the company who doubted the long-term impact of these changes. They still clung to the old ways, to the systems of power and hierarchy that had kept them at the top for so long. But Marcus wasn't worried. He knew that true change didn't happen overnight. It happened through consistent action, through proving the value of what you were doing day by day, moment by moment, and he was committed to doing just that. One day, as Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing the latest round of performance evaluations, his phone rang. It was Carla. "Marcus," she said, "there's someone here to see you. They're from the press, and they want to do an interview about the changes at the company. They've been following your story, and they want to hear directly from you." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. The press had been buzzing about the company's transformation, but he had always kept a low profile. Now, it seemed like the right time to speak out, to share his vision, and to let the world know what they had accomplished. "Send them in," he said. When the reporter entered his office, Marcus stood and extended his hand. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "I've got a lot to share." As the interview began, Marcus spoke candidly about the challenges, the successes, and the lessons learned along the way. He talked about the importance of creating an environment where people felt seen, heard, and valued. He talked about the responsibility that came with leadership and the power of building a culture of respect and opportunity. As the interview came to an end, the reporter smiled. "It's clear that you've created something truly special here, Mr. Carter," she said. "This story is going to resonate with a lot of people." Marcus nodded, his expression steady. "This isn't just about the company," he said. "It's about showing the world that things can be different. We're not just changing the company. We're changing the way people think about success, about opportunity, and about leadership." As the reporter left, Marcus sat back in his chair, a feeling of deep satisfaction settling over him. The work was far from over, but he knew that they had created something that would last, something that would continue to inspire and impact lives for generations to come. And that, he thought, was the real measure of success. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. As the months continued to unfold, Marcus watched with a sense of fulfillment as the changes within his company took root. What had started as a dream of transforming the corporate culture into one of fairness, equality, and opportunity for all had become a tangible reality. The atmosphere in the office had shifted from one of suspicion and competition to collaboration and innovation. The sense of purpose that Marcus had instilled in the company was contagious. People were no longer just working to climb the corporate ladder, they were working to build something meaningful. For the first time in years, employees were excited to come to work. They were eager to contribute, to share their ideas, and to help shape the future of the company. Marcus's leadership had sparked something much greater than he had anticipated. And as the company flourished, Marcus found himself standing at the crossroads of a new chapter in his life. The work was far from over, but he could sense that the foundation had been laid for something lasting. It was not just about changing the company anymore, it was about changing the industry, about setting an example for others to follow. One morning, as Marcus sat at his desk reviewing the latest quarterly report, Carla entered with a concerned look on her face. She held up her phone, showing him a news alert. "Marcus, this just came in," she said. "It's an article about you. It's got mixed reactions." Marcus took the phone, his eyes scanning the headline. Asterisk. Marcus Carter's Leadership Revolution. A new standard for corporate America, or just another trend? Asterisk. The article was a mixture of praise and skepticism. Some hailed Marcus's leadership as a breath of fresh air for the industry, a bold move toward creating a more inclusive and fair work environment. Others questioned whether the changes were sustainable, whether they were simply a momentary trend rather than a genuine shift in the corporate landscape. Marcus couldn't help but smile slightly. He had expected this. Change, especially on the scale he had implemented, was always met with resistance. But that didn't bother him. What mattered was that the conversation had started. People were talking about the future of business, about what it meant to be a leader in the 21st century, and that was exactly what he had set out to do. "Let's set up a press conference," Marcus said to Carla, his tone calm but determined. "It's time to address the skepticism head-on." Within days, the press conference was scheduled. Marcus stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing as they waited for him to speak. The room buzzed with anticipation. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he was ready. He had nothing to hide, and he was confident in the path he had chosen. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice steady, strong. "Thank you for being here today. I know there's been a lot of talk recently about the direction this company is heading, and I'd like to take the opportunity to address some of the concerns that have been raised." He paused, scanning the room, locking eyes with several reporters in the front row. "When I took over this company, I made a promise to myself and to every employee here. We would build a company where talent, hard work, and integrity were the true measures of success. A company where every person, regardless of their race, background, or socioeconomic status, would have the opportunity to succeed. And that is what we have been working toward every day. But I know that not everyone agrees with the changes we've made," he continued, his voice firm. "Some of you think that these changes are just a trend, something that will fade away in time. And that's fair. Change can be uncomfortable, especially for those who have benefited from the status quo. But I am here to tell you that these changes are not temporary. They are permanent. We are building something that will last, a company that reflects the values of equity, fairness, and opportunity. And that is a company that will not only survive, but thrive in the long term." The reporters scribbled notes as Marcus spoke, their cameras capturing every word. "I understand that change is hard," he continued, his tone softening slightly. "But the truth is, it's harder to continue to ignore the problems that have plagued corporate America for far too long. Inequality, discrimination, and a lack of opportunity for those who need it most. It's time for that to change, and we're not just changing our company, we're changing the industry." Marcus paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about creating a future where every person, regardless of their background, has the chance to succeed. And that future starts today." The room was silent for a moment before a reporter raised his hand. "Mr. Carter," he asked, "what do you say to those who argue that this is just another form of corporate virtue signaling? That this is all talk and no action?" Marcus nodded, acknowledging the question. "To those people, I say this. Watch what we do, not just what we say. Talk is easy. Action is hard. But we're taking action every single day. We've already implemented mentorship programs, internship opportunities, and a new recruitment process that focuses on talent, not background. We're actively investing in underrepresented communities, and we're holding ourselves accountable for our progress. So if you want to see if this is just talk, look at the results." The reporter nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Marcus continued to field questions for the next hour. Each one met with a calm, measured response. The press conference ended with a sense of finality, and as Marcus stepped off the stage, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation had been tough, but it had been necessary. The world was watching, and it was time to prove that his vision wasn't just a dream, it was a reality. As the days passed, the reactions to the press conference began to roll in. Some remained skeptical, but the majority recognized that Marcus was onto something. The company's stock price continued to rise, the workforce remained engaged, and the changes he had implemented began to inspire other companies to follow suit. Marcus knew there was still work to be done, but the momentum was undeniable. He had started a revolution, and there was no turning back. The future was bright, and it was only just beginning. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. As the weeks passed following the press conference, the momentum continued to build. Marcus could feel the tide turning, not just within his company, but across the industry. What had once seemed like an impossible dream was now becoming a reality. His efforts to bring about meaningful change were being recognized not just by his employees, but by competitors, media outlets, and even industry leaders. The conversations that had once been quiet murmurs in corporate hallways were now becoming loud, undeniable discussions about the future of business. Marcus had shown that leadership could be about more than just profits, it could be about people. But even as the world started to take notice, Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. It wasn't about changing public opinion, it was about changing the system itself. One morning, as he sat in his office reviewing the latest reports, Carla walked in, holding a folder. "Marcus," she said, "I think you'll want to see this." She handed him the folder, and Marcus opened it to find a proposal from a major competitor. The company had been closely watching the changes Marcus had made, and they were now suggesting a partnership. The proposal was clear. They wanted to collaborate on a joint initiative to push forward the ideas Marcus had championed: diversity, equity, and inclusion across the broader business community. Marcus sat back in his chair, his eyes scanning the document. This was a moment he had anticipated, but he wasn't sure he had expected it to come this soon. A direct competitor, one that had once been part of the old guard, was now reaching out to work with him. The tides were turning faster than he had imagined. After reading through the proposal, Marcus leaned back and smiled. This was the kind of change he had envisioned, the kind that went beyond his own company and started to shift the entire industry. He picked up the phone and dialed the number at the top of the proposal. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was the CEO of the competitor, a man Marcus had met a few times at industry events. "Hello, Marcus," the voice said, warm but with an undertone of caution. "I'm glad we're able to connect." Marcus smiled, leaning forward. "I'm glad too," he said. "I've been expecting to hear from you." There was a pause on the other end. "We've been following your leadership closely," the CEO continued. "And honestly, we're impressed. The changes you've made in your company are groundbreaking, and we believe we can work together to bring about even more change." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "I appreciate that," he said. "But I need to ask, why now? Why the sudden shift? You were part of the old system." The CEO let out a sigh. "The old system isn't working anymore, Marcus. It's breaking down. The world is changing, and we've seen the success you've had with your approach. We realize that we can't continue operating the way we have. The time for change is now, and we want to be part of that change." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already racing with possibilities. This was more than just a business opportunity. This was a chance to further solidify the shift in the industry that he had started. "All right," Marcus said, "let's talk about the details. We can make something incredible happen together." Over the next few weeks, the two companies worked together to form a plan that would not only create industry-wide change, but also foster a new standard for corporate behavior. The partnership was groundbreaking in its scope, bringing together two companies that had once competed against each other but were now united by a common cause. The initiative they created was designed to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion weren't just buzzwords, but concrete actions that every business could implement. The partnership wasn't just about pushing policy, it was about changing the way people thought about business. It was about showing that success wasn't just about what you could extract from people, but what you could give back to them. As the partnership took shape, Marcus felt a growing sense of purpose. He knew that this was only the beginning. There was still so much work to do, but now he wasn't alone in the fight. The weight of responsibility felt lighter when it was shared by others who believed in the same vision. Marcus began traveling more, meeting with other CEOs, speaking at industry conferences, and pushing his message even further. The press coverage continued, but Marcus was no longer concerned with the spotlight. He was focused on the work, the real work of creating a world where people were given the chance to succeed based on their abilities, not their background. One evening, as Marcus prepared for yet another presentation at an upcoming industry summit, he received an email that stopped him in his tracks. It was from Maya, the woman from the nonprofit he had partnered with earlier in the year. Her message was simple, but it struck a chord. Asterisk. "We've seen the impact your partnership has had on our community. You've created a path for young people who were once told they didn't belong. We can't thank you enough for giving them a chance." Asterisk. Marcus stared at the email for a moment, feeling a sense of gratitude and accomplishment that went beyond anything he had expected. This was why he had started this journey. This was the real success. The success wasn't in the headlines, the press conferences, or the partnerships. It was in the lives that had been changed, the people who had been given a chance, and the futures that had been rewritten. As he closed his laptop, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead would continue to be challenging, that change was never easy, and that there would be more obstacles to overcome. But in that moment, he was certain of one thing. The world was already a better place because of the work he had done, and the work was far from over. The future was full of possibilities, and he was ready for whatever came next. Asterisk, asterisk. As Marcus continued to lead the company into uncharted territory, he began to realize that the true test of his leadership was not only in the success of his company, but in how far his influence could extend beyond the walls of the office. The partnership with his competitor had already started to make waves across the industry, but it was clear that change needed to go even further. Marcus wasn't content with being a beacon of progress within his own company. He wanted to be a catalyst for change on a global scale. One morning, as he sat in his office overlooking the city, a thought struck him. He had spent so much time focusing on what was happening inside the company, on the immediate impact of the changes he was making. But what about the world outside? What about the millions of people in communities who still faced systemic barriers to success, who still struggled to find opportunities because of the environment they were born into? Marcus knew he had the platform, the resources, and the influence to make a bigger impact. And so, with the determination that had defined his entire career, he began to formulate a new plan, one that would take the principles of equity, opportunity, and inclusion to the next level. He called it the Opportunity Initiative. It was a broad, ambitious program designed to give people from underserved communities access to the resources and opportunities they needed to build careers in industries where they had been historically excluded. The initiative would not only focus on corporate partnerships, but also on education, mentorship, and direct investment in communities. Marcus had already made strides within his own company, but he realized that in order to create true, lasting change, he would need to involve others. It was time to expand his reach, to bring in companies, nonprofit organizations, and even government entities that were willing to align with his vision. He picked up the phone and called Maya, the head of the nonprofit organization he had partnered with earlier. "Maya, I've been thinking," Marcus began. "What if we take what we've done here at the company and expand it? What if we create a nationwide initiative that works to connect young people from underserved communities with career opportunities, mentorship, and education? We can make real change if we bring together businesses, schools, and community organizations." Maya was silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of what Marcus was proposing. That's huge," she said finally. "But you're right. We've seen the success we've had on a smaller scale. Imagine what we could do if we had the resources and the collective power of others behind us." Marcus felt a surge of excitement. This was the next step. This was what he had been working toward all along. "Let's make it happen," he said. "Let's bring people together and change the narrative. We have the ability to create opportunities on a scale that no one has ever done before, but we need to do it the right way through collaboration, transparency, and real action." Over the next few months, Marcus worked tirelessly to bring the Opportunity Initiative to life. He reached out to other CEOs, politicians, and nonprofit leaders, asking them to join him in his mission. The response was overwhelming. People were eager to get involved, to be part of something bigger than themselves. Soon, a network of companies, organizations, and individuals was formed, each contributing their own resources, expertise, and energy toward the common goal of creating equal access to opportunity. The initiative included scholarships for young people, mentorship programs, partnerships with schools to create pathways into industries like technology, finance, and healthcare, and corporate internships that would provide real-world experience. But perhaps the most groundbreaking aspect of the initiative was its focus on dismantling the systemic barriers that had long kept marginalized groups from reaching their full potential. Marcus knew that it wasn't enough just to provide opportunities. He had to ensure that the systems in place were actively working to support the people who would take advantage of those opportunities. As the program gained traction, Marcus began to see the tangible results of his work. More and more young people from underserved communities were being placed in internships and apprenticeships, where they gained hands-on experience and built relationships with industry professionals. The mentorship programs flourished, helping guide the next generation of leaders, many of whom had never dreamed of entering corporate spaces. In just a few short months, the Opportunity Initiative had already begun to change lives. And yet, Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and there would be challenges along the way. There were still those who resisted change, those who felt threatened by the disruption Marcus's initiatives were causing. But he wasn't deterred. The power of the Opportunity Initiative lay not just in its potential to change lives, but in its ability to shift mindsets. It wasn't just about providing opportunities, it was about showing people that change was possible, that everyone, no matter their background, had the ability to succeed if given the right tools and support. One afternoon, as Marcus was preparing for another round of meetings with potential partners, he received a letter that caught his attention. It was from the mayor's office. The letter congratulated Marcus on the success of the Opportunity Initiative and invited him to collaborate on a citywide initiative to provide job training and educational resources to young people in low-income neighborhoods. The letter was a recognition not only of the impact Marcus had made, but of the potential for even greater collaboration between the public and private sectors. Marcus smiled as he read through the letter. This was exactly the kind of support he needed to take the initiative to the next level. He picked up the phone and dialed the number at the top of the letter. "Hello, this is Marcus Carter," he said. "I just received your letter, and I'm very interested in discussing how we can work together on a citywide initiative. Let's make it happen." As the conversation continued, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were falling into place. What had started as a small vision for his company had now become a movement, one that was spreading beyond the walls of his organization and into communities, cities, and industries across the country. The future was bright, and Marcus was determined to ensure that every person, no matter where they came from, had the chance to succeed. The road was long, but Marcus was prepared for the journey. He had made a promise to change the world, and he intended to keep it. Asterisk, asterisk. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, as Marcus and his team began to expand the Opportunity Initiative in ways he hadn't even imagined when he first conceived the idea. The partnerships continued to grow, reaching cities across the country. Businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies came together to create new pathways for young people, particularly from marginalized communities, to access opportunities that had previously been out of reach. It was an exciting time, but also an exhausting one. Marcus spent his days in meetings, traveling from one city to another, advocating for the program, and meeting with community leaders. But through it all, he remained focused on the larger goal, changing the narrative about what was possible for people who had been historically excluded from the corporate world. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Marcus found himself back in his office, alone. The city skyline stretched out before him, and for a moment, he let himself pause and take it all in. The work had been incredibly rewarding, but it had also taken a toll. He was exhausted, mentally and physically. Yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of satisfaction that came with seeing the impact of his work. The Opportunity Initiative was growing, and it was changing lives. He couldn't deny the fulfillment that came with that. Just as he was about to sit down and review some reports, his phone rang. It was Carla. "Marcus, I've got something you need to hear," she said, her voice urgent. "A few people from the Department of Education have been in touch. They want to discuss a national partnership that could take the Opportunity Initiative to another level." Marcus's interest piqued. "What kind of partnership?" he asked, already sensing that this could be the next big step. "They want to work together to create a federally backed initiative that supports workforce development and education reform," Carla explained. "They're looking at the Opportunity Initiative as a model. They believe it could scale nationwide with the right resources, and they want you to be part of the planning process." Marcus felt a rush of excitement mixed with a sense of disbelief. A partnership with the Department of Education could take everything he had worked for to an entirely new level. This was exactly what he had hoped for, an opportunity to scale his vision across the entire country, affecting policy, education, and workforce development on a national scale. "Set up the meeting," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. "This is exactly what we need." The following week, Marcus sat in a meeting with representatives from the Department of Education, including the Secretary of Education, a few senior advisors, and key members of the Federal Workforce Development Team. The room was filled with the kind of people who could make monumental decisions, people who could change the landscape of education and employment for generations. As the meeting progressed, the conversation centered around how Marcus's model for corporate partnerships, mentorship, and job training could be adapted on a national level. They discussed the possibility of creating federally funded mentorship programs, workforce development grants, and incentives for companies to hire from underrepresented communities. Marcus presented the Opportunity Initiative as a scalable blueprint that could be implemented across the country. His passion for the initiative was evident in his words, but it was his track record, his ability to get things done, that really struck a chord with the officials in the room. The meeting went on for several hours, and by the end, the foundation was laid for a new national program that would combine education reform with job training and workforce development. The initiative would be launched with the backing of both the federal government and private sector partners. This partnership would be the culmination of everything Marcus had worked toward: the opportunity to create lasting, systemic change in a way that could affect not just one company, but an entire nation. As the meeting concluded, Marcus shook hands with the Secretary of Education and the rest of the team. "This is the beginning of something incredible," the Secretary said, his voice full of optimism. "We are going to change lives, and we are going to do it together." Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "Together," he repeated. "This is just the beginning." As Marcus walked out of the meeting room, he couldn't help but think about how far he had come. From the days when he had been underestimated, dismissed, and written off, to now being a key player in one of the largest policy initiatives in the country. He had fought for a vision, and now that vision was being recognized on a national scale. It was a moment of validation, but Marcus knew that the work was far from finished. There was still so much to do. He wasn't just changing one company or one industry, he was changing the way the world viewed opportunity and how people from all walks of life could reach their full potential. The challenges ahead were substantial. There would be resistance, there would be setbacks, and there would be those who doubted whether the changes Marcus had implemented could truly be sustained. But Marcus was undeterred. He had seen firsthand what was possible when people were given the tools and the support they needed to succeed. He had seen lives transformed, careers launched, and futures changed for the better. That was the kind of change that drove him, and it was the kind of change he was committed to continuing. Back at the office, Marcus sat down with his leadership team, discussing the next steps for the Opportunity Initiative. The national partnership with the Department of Education was the next big hurdle, but they were prepared. They had built something powerful, and now it was time to take it to new heights. As they mapped out the future of the program, Marcus felt the same fire he had felt when he first started. The vision had always been bigger than just a company. It had always been about creating a movement, one that would change the future of business and education for generations to come. The road ahead was still long, but with each step, Marcus felt more certain that they were on the right path. The work he had begun was bigger than he had ever imagined, and he was ready for the challenges, the opportunities, and the victories that lay ahead. The future was bright, and Marcus was more determined than ever to see it realized. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The success of the Opportunity Initiative and its expansion into a national program was met with a mixture of excitement and challenges. Marcus knew that while they had secured partnerships and created momentum, the hard work of implementing these changes on a large scale was only just beginning. His vision was becoming a reality, but the complexity of rolling it out nationwide required meticulous planning, coordination, and a deep understanding of the diverse needs of each community they were targeting. He was no longer just a CEO of one company, he was the leader of a movement, and the responsibility weighed heavily on him. Yet, despite the challenges, Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced before. This wasn't just about profits or market share, it was about people, about changing the way businesses interacted with the communities they served, about building bridges where there had once been walls. As the initiative expanded, Marcus and his team traveled across the country, meeting with community leaders, local organizations, schools, and businesses to ensure that the program was tailored to the specific needs of each area. Some cities were already ahead of the curve, with strong community programs and local business leaders who were eager to support the initiative. In others, they faced significant challenges: poverty, lack of access to education, and deeply ingrained social inequalities. But in every city, Marcus saw hope. He saw young people who were determined to create better lives for themselves, families who were willing to invest in their children's future, and business leaders who were beginning to understand that diversity and inclusion were not just about doing the right thing, it was also good for business. One evening, as Marcus sat in a hotel room in a small city on the East Coast, preparing for a presentation the next day, he received a call from Carla. "Marcus," she said, "I think you'll want to hear this." He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "What is it?" "It's about the program in Chicago," Carla said. "The feedback we've gotten from the young people participating has been incredible. They're thriving. But there's something else. a local business leader has reached out. He wants to invest in expanding the program even further. He believes in what we're doing and wants to be a part of it. Marcus's interest was piqued. Who is it? He asked. His name is Elijah Carter, Carla replied. He's the owner of a successful tech company in the area. He says he's been following the initiative closely and wants to help fund scholarships for students who are interested in pursuing careers in technology. Marcus smiled. This was exactly the kind of support he had hoped for when he started the Opportunity Initiative private sector involvement that went beyond just giving money, but involved actively investing in the future of young people. Set up a meeting with him, Marcus said, his excitement evident. This could be a game changer. The next day, Marcus met with Elijah Carter, who turned out to be a dynamic, forward-thinking entrepreneur with a passion for giving back to his community. He had built his tech company from the ground up, and his success had allowed him to be in a position to invest in the next generation. I've seen firsthand the lack of opportunity for young people in this city, Elijah said during their meeting. I grew up here, and I know what it's like to feel like the odds are stacked against you. I want to make sure the next generation has the support they need to succeed, and I think your program is the perfect way to make that happen. Marcus listened intently as Elijah spoke, impressed by his vision and his commitment. I've been thinking a lot about this, Elijah continued. We can do more than just fund scholarships. We can create internships, mentorship programs, and even a job placement network that will connect these students directly with opportunities in the tech industry. I want to invest in these young people because I know they have the potential to change the world. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude and excitement. This was the type of collaboration that would take the Opportunity Initiative to the next level. I couldn't agree more, Marcus said. The best way to make a lasting impact is to give these young people a clear pathway to success. We can create something powerful together, something that will provide opportunities for generations to come. Over the next few months, Marcus and Elijah worked closely together to develop the tech-focused expansion of the Opportunity Initiative. The new program would provide students with scholarships, job training, and hands-on experience in the tech industry. It would also offer mentorship from professionals already working in the field, giving the students a direct link to the real world of tech innovation. The announcement of the new program was met with excitement from both the local community and the broader tech industry. Marcus and Elijah's partnership was seen as a model for how businesses could and should engage with the communities they were a part of. But despite the positive momentum, Marcus knew that there was still a long road ahead. The work of changing an entire industry, of creating a culture where opportunity was truly available to all, was far from complete. It would take time, and there would be setbacks along the way. But Marcus was no longer concerned with the inevitable challenges. What mattered to him was that they had started a movement that was already changing lives and reshaping the future. As he looked back on the path he had traveled, from the early days of launching the Opportunity Initiative to the growing success of the national program, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every late night, and every setback. The changes they had made were real, and they were sustainable. This was just the beginning. Marcus knew that the real test would come in the years ahead, as the next generation of leaders and innovators grew up with the opportunity to thrive in an environment that was built on fairness, equity, and inclusion. The world was changing, and Marcus was leading the charge. But even as he felt the weight of the responsibility, he knew that the work would continue. It wasn't about one company, one partnership, or one initiative. It was about changing the world, one opportunity at a time. And with that thought, Marcus sat back in his chair, ready for the next phase of the journey. The future was wide open, and he was determined to help as many people as possible step through the door. Asterisk, asterisk. As the months passed and the Opportunity Initiative expanded, Marcus found himself increasingly pulled in different directions. The national program was growing at an impressive rate, and more businesses were reaching out to get involved, eager to create pathways for young people from underserved communities. What had started as a small idea was now a nationwide movement, and Marcus couldn't have been prouder of what they had accomplished. Yet with every success came new challenges. The scope of the initiative required constant attention, and Marcus was juggling meetings with potential partners, local governments, nonprofit organizations, and community leaders. Despite the pressure, he was resolute. He knew that the path to lasting change would not be easy, but it was one he was willing to walk. One evening, as Marcus reviewed a report from one of the newly launched programs, he felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. The impact of the Opportunity Initiative was undeniable. Thousands of young people were gaining access to internships, mentorships, and educational programs, and many were already landing jobs in industries where they had once been excluded. However, despite the tangible success, Marcus could feel an undercurrent of doubt starting to form. The initiative had made great strides, but Marcus knew that true, lasting change wasn't just about creating opportunities, it was about dismantling the systems that had held people back for so long. As the program expanded, it was clear that while many businesses had embraced the changes, there were still some that were resistant to the idea of reshaping their hiring practices. Some were content to hire from the same old pool of candidates, ignoring the wealth of untapped talent that was now being introduced by the Opportunity Initiative. It was a frustration that Marcus couldn't shake. One afternoon, as he was meeting with a group of executives from a major corporation that had recently joined the initiative, Marcus found himself growing impatient. The conversation was supposed to be about increasing the number of internships they offered, but the executives kept focusing on the same tired concerns. "I don't know," one of them said. "It's just a big risk. We're not sure that these candidates are ready for the kind of work we do here." Marcus felt a sharp frustration rise in his chest. "What exactly do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. The executive seemed to hesitate for a moment. "Well, these are young people from backgrounds that aren't traditionally in the corporate world. It's just hard to know if they're ready for the pace and the expectations." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice calm but with an edge. "The only thing these young people are lacking is opportunity. They have the skills, they have the drive. What they need is a chance. And if you're not willing to give them that chance, then maybe you're not the kind of partner I want for this initiative." The room went quiet. The other executives exchanged uncertain glances, but Marcus held his ground. After a long pause, one of the executives spoke up. "I think you're right," he said, nodding slowly. "Maybe we've been too focused on what's comfortable and familiar. Maybe it's time for us to take a real risk and invest in these young people." Marcus smiled, the tension in the room easing slightly. "That's the spirit," he said. "It's not about comfort, it's about changing the way we do business. And if we're truly going to make a difference, we have to be willing to make bold moves." The meeting ended on a positive note, and Marcus walked out of the conference room feeling a little lighter. It wasn't easy, but he had made progress. He knew that change, especially on the scale he was working toward, was never going to happen without resistance. But every time he faced that resistance and overcame it, it brought them one step closer to creating the kind of world he wanted to live, in a world where opportunity was truly available to everyone. The days continued to blur together as Marcus spent his time meeting with more potential partners, working on new initiatives, and attending events that allowed him to speak directly to the people whose lives had been impacted by the Opportunity Initiative. At one of these events, Marcus was invited to speak at a conference on education reform, an area that had become increasingly important to him as the Opportunity Initiative expanded. He took the stage, the audience of educators, policymakers, and business leaders listening intently. Marcus spoke from the heart, sharing the journey he had been on and the lessons he had learned along the way. "I've seen what happens when young people are given the chance to succeed," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "I've seen lives transformed, careers launched, and futures rewritten. But we all know that it's not enough to create opportunities. We have to create systems that ensure these opportunities are available to everyone regardless of their background." The room was silent as Marcus continued. "It's time for us to ask ourselves, what kind of world are we building? Are we building one where the system is rigged to benefit the few, or one where everyone has a chance to thrive? The answer to that question will determine the future of our country, our industries, and our communities. We cannot afford to wait any longer. The time for change is now." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus didn't stay to bask in it. He knew that the real work was still ahead. There were still too many barriers to break down, too many systems to dismantle, and too many people who still believed that success was something reserved for a select few. But he was undeterred. With each step, Marcus knew they were making a difference, and he wasn't about to stop now. As the conference came to a close, Marcus met with several influential figures who were eager to discuss ways they could further support the Opportunity Initiative. They spoke about creating new partnerships, expanding access to education, and building an even broader network of support for young people across the country. The conversation was optimistic, and for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to feel the weight of how far they had come. He had set out to change his company, and from there, the industry. But now, he was beginning to change the world. As he boarded his plane back to headquarters, Marcus looked out the window at the vast expanse of land below him. There was so much more to do, but the road ahead felt a little less daunting. He had started a movement, and movements were unstoppable. He was ready for whatever came next. Asterisk. Asterisk. As Marcus continued to work tirelessly on the Opportunity Initiative, he realized that the road ahead was only going to get more complex. The momentum was undeniable, but with each new milestone came a deeper set of challenges. He was now dealing with an entire ecosystem of partners, each with their own goals and expectations. He was no longer simply running a company, he was leading a nationwide movement. His days were filled with endless meetings, phone calls, and travel. And while he felt the weight of the responsibility, he also felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. It was during one of these intense weeks that Marcus found himself at a crossroads. Despite the progress they had made, despite the success stories and the growing number of young people whose lives were being changed, there were still those who doubted the sustainability of the program. Some corporate leaders were starting to ask if the initiative was truly scalable, whether the model he had created could continue to work as it expanded. Even some of his closest allies were starting to question how long it would take before the inevitable challenges of such an ambitious program would start to overwhelm the system. Marcus could feel the pressure building, but rather than shrinking from it, he leaned into it. He knew that real change wasn't supposed to be easy. It wasn't supposed to be comfortable. What he had started wasn't about quick wins. It was about changing an entire culture, and that was going to take time, persistence, and unwavering commitment. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Marcus sat at his desk late into the night, going over some of the feedback from recent program evaluations. There were many positive reviews, but there were also concerns, especially from the business community. Some companies had already reaped the benefits of the initiative, but others were still hesitant, unsure of whether the effort to integrate young people from underrepresented communities into their workforce would truly pay off in the long run. As Marcus mulled over the data, he realized that what was needed was a clear, undeniable demonstration of the initiative's success, not just in terms of the number of participants, but in terms of the long-term benefits for businesses and the economy as a whole. He needed a case study, a living, breathing example of how the Opportunity Initiative could work in the real world, on a grand scale. And then it hit him. What if they could partner with a major corporation that was already well established in the marketplace, one that had the resources, the infrastructure, and the global reach to show that this initiative could work for companies of all sizes? He picked up the phone and called Carla. "I have an idea," he said. "I want to meet with a few of the major players in the retail and technology sectors. I'm thinking we need a flagship partnership, something that demonstrates to the world that this is sustainable. If we can prove it with a company of their scale, it will open doors for everyone else." Carla was quiet for a moment, then responded with a tone of certainty. "I think you're onto something, Marcus. Let's start reaching out to the right people." Over the next few weeks, Marcus and his team worked tirelessly to secure meetings with executives from some of the world's largest companies. They needed partners who were not only willing to embrace the Opportunity Initiative, but who were also prepared to commit significant resources to the program. After several rounds of meetings and discussions, they secured a meeting with the CEO of one of the largest technology companies in the world, a company that had long been known for its innovation, but had been criticized for its lack of diversity. The meeting was set for the following week. As Marcus prepared for the high-stakes conversation, he knew this would be one of the most important moments of his career. If he could convince this company to partner with the Opportunity Initiative, it would be a game changer. It would prove to the world that the program wasn't just an idea, it was a movement that could transform industries on a global scale. The day of the meeting arrived, and Marcus found himself sitting across from the CEO of the tech giant, a woman known for her sharp business acumen and no-nonsense approach. "Marcus, thank you for taking the time to meet," the CEO began. "I've heard a lot about your work with the Opportunity Initiative. I have to admit I'm intrigued, but before we move forward, I need to understand why we should invest in this." "What's in it for us?" Marcus smiled, knowing that this was the moment to make his case. "It's simple," he said. "The world is changing, and so is the workforce. Companies that don't adapt to this shift are going to find themselves left behind. The Opportunity Initiative is about creating a workforce that reflects the diversity of the world we live in. By partnering with us, you will not only be fostering a more inclusive and equitable environment, but you will also gain access to a pool of untapped talent. These are young people who are eager to work, who have the skills and the drive to succeed, and by giving them the chance, you're going to have a competitive edge in a rapidly changing market. It's an investment in the future. The CEO leaned back in her chair, considering his words. "And what about the long-term results?" she asked. "How do we know this will be sustainable?" Marcus took a deep breath. "The key to sustainability is partnership. We're not asking you to simply write a check. We're asking you to be part of this initiative to mentor, to train, and to create a direct pathway to employment. It's about building relationships, providing real opportunities, and ensuring that these young people have the resources they need to succeed. When you invest in people, you're investing in the future of your company, your industry, and the economy. This isn't just a one-time project, it's a long-term commitment." There was a moment of silence as the CEO processed his words. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Marcus," she said. "You've convinced me. Let's do it." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. With this partnership in place, the Opportunity Initiative would have the validation it needed to prove that it was not only viable but essential for the future of business. The impact of this deal would ripple through the industry, and soon, other companies would follow suit. As Marcus left the meeting, he knew that the next phase of the journey had just begun. The road ahead was still long, but with this major partnership, the Opportunity Initiative was poised to reach new heights. Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of pride not in what he had accomplished, but in what was still to come. The work was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he could see the future clearly ahead of him. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The partnership with the tech giant marked a pivotal moment in the Opportunity Initiative's journey. It wasn't just the financial backing or the resources that mattered, it was the validation. It sent a message that the initiative was no longer a fringe movement. It was becoming a driving force for change in the corporate world. As the announcement went live, Marcus received an overwhelming amount of attention, both positive and critical. Media outlets hailed the partnership as a turning point in corporate responsibility, a major step forward for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But there were still skeptics, those who questioned whether this was a passing trend or a genuine, lasting transformation. Marcus didn't let the skepticism faze him. He had never been someone who shied away from challenges, and this was no different. He knew that the true measure of success would come in the months and years ahead, when the results of this partnership would begin to take shape. The real work was just beginning. Over the following months, Marcus found himself overseeing the scaling of the Opportunity Initiative, managing its growth, and working closely with the tech giant's leadership team to ensure that the mentorship and internship programs were meeting the expectations set. The feedback from the first round of participants was overwhelmingly positive. Many of the young people who had entered the program were thriving, securing full-time positions and gaining invaluable experience. It was clear that the initiative was having a direct, positive impact on both the participants and the companies that were involved. But there were still areas that needed improvement. Some of the businesses involved in the program were struggling to integrate their new interns and employees, unsure of how to balance diversity with the demands of their high-pressure work environments. It was a challenge Marcus had anticipated, but it still required his full attention. He made it a point to personally meet with business leaders, offering guidance and support as they navigated the integration process. He also worked closely with his team to refine the mentorship programs, ensuring that participants had the resources and guidance they needed to succeed. As he traveled from city to city, meeting with business leaders, nonprofit partners, and local government officials, Marcus felt both a sense of pride and urgency. The program was growing, but he knew that in order to sustain it, he needed to continue to evolve. The key to success wasn't just about bringing more companies on board, it was about creating lasting partnerships that were built on mutual trust and commitment to shared values. Marcus spent countless hours working with government officials, advocating for policies that would support workforce development and education reform. He knew that the federal government's involvement was crucial if the initiative was going to scale nationwide. The more he engaged with policymakers, the more he realized that the system itself was in need of an overhaul. Too many barriers still existed for people from underrepresented communities, and Marcus was determined to address them. He began working on a new initiative within the Opportunity Initiative, focused on advocating for policy change that would ensure that the barriers to access, whether in education, hiring practices, or career advancement, were removed at the systemic level. It was a huge undertaking, but Marcus was ready. He knew that if he could push for changes in policy, the Opportunity Initiative would have a far greater impact. As he sat in his office one evening, reviewing the latest updates on the program's progress, Marcus received a call from the mayor's office in one of the cities where the initiative had made a significant impact. "Marcus, I just wanted to personally thank you," the mayor said. "What your initiative has done here has been nothing short of transformative. The young people in our community who were once struggling to find jobs now have careers. They have hope, and it's because of the partnerships you've helped create. We want to do more, and we want to do it with you." Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was why he had started this journey to create lasting change, to open doors for people who had been locked out for far too long. "Thank you," he said. "But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us working together to make this happen. We're just getting started, and I'm excited to see what we can accomplish together." The mayor's words served as a reminder of just how far they had come. When Marcus had first started the Opportunity Initiative, it had been a small idea, something he had hoped could make a difference. Now, it was a movement that was changing lives and challenging the systems that had kept people from reaching their full potential. But Marcus knew the journey was far from over. There were still countless communities that hadn't yet been reached, still too many barriers in place, and too many people who still needed support. He wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He knew that the next phase of the journey would require even greater effort, greater collaboration, and greater persistence. As he sat back in his chair, reflecting on the progress that had been made, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. But it wasn't the kind of fulfillment that comes from a job well done. It was the fulfillment that comes from knowing that he had built something that was bigger than himself. The Opportunity Initiative wasn't just about creating a program, it was about creating a movement. And movements didn't stop. They continued to evolve, to grow, to challenge the status quo. Marcus had always believed that leadership wasn't about having all the answers, it was about asking the right questions, listening to others, and creating an environment where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. As he prepared for the next phase of the initiative, he knew that this was just the beginning. The world was changing, and he was going to be there every step of the way, helping to shape the future, one opportunity at a time. Asterisk. As Marcus continued to lead the Opportunity Initiative, he found that his vision had already begun to transform more than just corporate practices. It was reshaping entire communities. The nationwide expansion was progressing well, and the growing number of companies involved was a testament to the increasing acceptance of the initiative's core principles. Businesses were beginning to see the true value of investing in diversity and inclusion, not just as a moral obligation, but as a competitive advantage that enhanced their bottom lines. Yet, even as the initiative made waves, Marcus knew there was still much work to be done. The systemic barriers that had held people back for decades could not be dismantled overnight, and there were always those who resisted change, no matter how compelling the argument for it. The journey had been difficult, but Marcus had never expected it to be easy. What kept him going was the tangible change he saw on the ground, the faces of young people who had once been overlooked, now thriving in roles they had never dreamed possible. Their success stories fueled his determination to continue pushing forward. One afternoon, Marcus sat at his desk, going through the latest reports on the program's progress. It was a typical day, filled with data, strategy meetings, and more plans for future expansion. But as he skimmed through the feedback from the newest cohort of interns, one email stood out. It was from a young man named Alex, an intern from a small town who had entered the program through a local partnership. The email was simple but powerful. "I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity," Alex wrote. "Before joining the program, I thought a future like this wasn't for people like me. I'm from a place where nobody expects much from you, but now I know I can do anything. Thank you for showing me that it's not where I come from, but where I'm going that matters." Reading those words, Marcus felt a deep sense of pride. This was why he had started the initiative in the first place, to give young people like Alex a chance to break the cycle of inequality. It wasn't about charity, It was about creating a level playing field. And seeing the real-world impact of that was more fulfilling than any business success or financial achievement. As Marcus continued to read the email, a thought occurred to him. If they were truly going to make lasting change, they needed to focus not only on expanding the program, but on creating pathways that led to long-term career success for these young people. It wasn't enough to give them an internship or a temporary opportunity. They needed to be set up for sustained growth and advancement. He knew this would require even more collaboration, more partnerships, and more investment from businesses across every industry. The following week, Marcus gathered his leadership team to discuss the next phase of the Opportunity Initiative. He proposed a new idea, a program that would bridge the gap between internships and permanent employment. "We've done great work so far," Marcus began, "but the real test will be ensuring that the young people we're bringing into these companies can find a long-term place in them. We need to build career pipelines, true pathways that allow these individuals to grow within the companies they've joined. That's how we'll prove the sustainability of this initiative." The room was silent for a moment, as everyone took in the gravity of what Marcus was proposing. This would be no small feat. It meant not just placing young people in entry-level positions, but offering them real opportunities for mentorship, skill development, and upward mobility. It would require businesses to take a long-term view of talent development, rather than focusing solely on immediate returns. After a lengthy discussion, the team agreed to move forward with the idea. They would focus on building stronger relationships with businesses, ensuring that companies were not only willing to bring in young talent but were committed to fostering their growth over the long term. It wasn't just about filling seats, it was about creating meaningful, sustainable careers. As the initiative progressed, Marcus spent more time in the field, meeting with program participants, company leaders, and local communities. Every city he visited reinforced his belief in the power of the Opportunity Initiative. He saw firsthand the difference it was making, not just in the lives of individuals, but in entire communities. In one city, Marcus met a young woman named Maria, who had grown up in a neighborhood plagued by violence and limited opportunity. She had joined the Opportunity Initiative after hearing about it from a local mentor. Today, she was thriving at one of the largest accounting firms in the country. "I never thought this was possible for someone like me," Maria told Marcus during their meeting. "But now I know it's not just a dream, it's a reality." Maria's story was one of many. As Marcus sat down with people like Maria, he realized that the true measure of success wasn't in the accolades or the media coverage. It was in the small personal victories, like seeing a young person who had once been told they didn't belong, now standing confidently in a role they had worked hard for. That was the change Marcus had always hoped for. That was the future he was building. Yet, as proud as Marcus was of the progress they had made, he knew that the work was far from over. Every day brought new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. The systems of inequality that had existed for generations were not going to disappear overnight. But Marcus was determined to continue fighting. With every new partnership, with every new success story, he was reminded that the future of the Opportunity Initiative was bright. The work would continue, the movement would grow, and more lives would be changed. He knew that the road ahead was long, but he was ready. This was his purpose, and he wasn't stopping now. The future was in their hands, and Marcus was committed to ensuring that every young person, regardless of where they came from, had the chance to shape it. Asterisk, asterisk. As the months went by, Marcus began to see the fruits of his labor manifest in ways that were both humbling and inspiring. The Opportunity Initiative, once a mere idea, had grown into a powerful force for change, and the momentum was undeniable. More and more businesses were joining the movement, eager to contribute to the mission of creating equal opportunities for all. The success stories of young people who had entered the program continued to pour in, each one reinforcing Marcus's belief that real change was possible when people were given the tools and support they needed to succeed. Yet, even as the initiative gained traction and saw increasing success, Marcus knew that the path ahead was not without its obstacles. Every day brought new challenges, some small, others monumental, but he remained committed to pushing forward. He understood that the work they were doing was important, but it was also just the beginning. The road to truly leveling the playing field for all was long, and Marcus had no intention of stopping. One afternoon, as Marcus was preparing for yet another round of meetings with business leaders, he received a call from Carla. "Marcus," she said, I think you'll want to hear this. Marcus, who had been reviewing some reports, put the papers down and listened intently. What is it? He asked. I just got off the phone with a group of investors, Carla replied. They're interested in backing a new initiative, a new phase of the Opportunity Initiative, and they're talking about significant funding. They want to hear from you. Marcus felt a wave of excitement. Set up the meeting, he said. Let's see what they're offering. The following week, Marcus met with the investors, a group of high-profile individuals who had made their mark in a variety of industries, from tech to real estate. As they sat around the table, Marcus listened closely as they outlined their vision for how they could further scale the Opportunity Initiative. We've seen the progress you've made, one of the investors said, and we believe there's potential to take this to an even larger scale. With the right resources, we could expand the program internationally. We want to be a part of that. Marcus considered their words carefully. Expanding the Opportunity Initiative internationally was a huge step, one that came with its own set of challenges, but the potential impact was enormous. This could mean providing young people from underserved communities not just with opportunities in the United States, but around the world. I appreciate your interest, Marcus said, his voice measured. But if we're going to do this, we need to stay true to the values that have guided this initiative from the very beginning. It's not just about scaling for the sake of growth. It's about ensuring that we create real, sustainable opportunities for people. If we can do that, then yes, expanding internationally makes sense. But we need to make sure we're building this the right way. The investors nodded, clearly impressed by Marcus's thoughtful response. That's exactly what we're hoping for, one of them said. We're not just looking to make a profit, we're looking to make a difference. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and his team worked closely with the investors to develop a plan for expanding the Opportunity Initiative globally. It wasn't going to be easy. There were cultural, logistical, and regulatory hurdles to overcome, but the potential to create lasting change on a global scale was too important to pass up. As the discussions continued, Marcus began to think about what this new phase of the initiative would mean for the young people whose lives had already been touched by the program. The Opportunity Initiative had always been about creating a ripple effect, about showing that when one person succeeds, they have the power to lift others up along the way. But expanding internationally would require them to think even bigger, to take their vision beyond the borders of the United States and create opportunities for young people in countries around the world. The challenge was daunting, but Marcus was determined to take it on. The potential for positive change was immense, and he couldn't ignore the opportunity to impact millions of lives. As the project gained momentum, Marcus began traveling internationally, meeting with leaders in other countries, discussing how the Opportunity Initiative could be adapted to different cultural contexts. He was welcomed with open arms in many places, and in others, he encountered resistance. But Marcus had always been a master at navigating the complexities of change. He understood that it wasn't just about introducing a program, it was about understanding the unique needs of each community and working together to create solutions. One of the key lessons Marcus had learned along the way was that real change didn't come from imposing a one-size-fits-all solution. It came from listening to the people who were most affected by the problems and empowering them to be part of the solution. As Marcus visited various countries, he made it a point to meet with local community leaders, educators, and young people who would ultimately benefit from the program. He wanted to understand their needs and their challenges to ensure that the Opportunity Initiative would be truly impactful and relevant. Each trip reinforced his belief that this global expansion was not just about scaling a program, it was about creating a global network of opportunity, one that spanned continents and bridged gaps between cultures, industries, and backgrounds. As Marcus continued to work on the international expansion, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He had come a long way from the days when his company had been in crisis. He had built something meaningful, something that could change the world. But as he looked ahead, he knew that the work was far from done. The Opportunity Initiative had the potential to transform not just the lives of individuals, but entire communities, entire industries, and ultimately, the world. And Marcus was determined to be there every step of the way, helping to shape the future and ensuring that every young person, no matter where they were born, had the opportunity to succeed. Asterisk, asterisk. As Marcus continued his work with the Opportunity Initiative, he could not help but reflect on how far they had come. What had started as a single, bold idea to create opportunities for underrepresented communities had transformed into a powerful movement with the potential to change the world. The initiative had gained international recognition, and partnerships were flourishing across the globe. Marcus had always known that the journey would not be easy, but the progress they had made was proof that change was possible. He had dedicated his life to this cause, and now it was bearing fruit. However, even with the success of the initiative, Marcus knew that his work was far from finished. The barriers to equality and opportunity were still vast, and as the program expanded, new challenges arose. While businesses were becoming more open to diversity and inclusion, the systems that had reinforced inequality for so long were not dismantled overnight. Many industries still needed to address their deep-seated biases, and many communities remained trapped in cycles of poverty, lacking access to the resources they needed to succeed. Marcus was determined to continue pushing for lasting change, but now he had an even clearer understanding of what that meant. It wasn't just about providing opportunities, it was about transforming the systems that created inequality in the first place. One day, as Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing progress reports from international partners, he received an unexpected call from a government official. "Marcus, we've been following the Opportunity Initiative closely, and we'd like to talk about taking your model and integrating it into public policy on a national scale," the official said. "The work you've done is inspiring, and we believe it could serve as a blueprint for future education and employment reforms." Marcus was both surprised and elated. A partnership with the government could bring the initiative to even more people and create broader systemic changes that would affect entire industries. The opportunity to scale this program through national policy was the next logical step in creating lasting change. "I'd be happy to discuss how we can collaborate," Marcus responded. "This is exactly the kind of support we need to ensure that the opportunities we've been creating for individuals can be reflected in national policy. I'm excited to see how we can work together to make a bigger impact." Over the next few months, Marcus worked closely with policymakers to integrate the principles of the Opportunity Initiative into national legislation. The discussions were long and complex, with many hurdles to overcome, but Marcus remained steadfast. The government's involvement would be critical in ensuring that the opportunities created by the initiative could be sustained across generations. As the legislation began to take shape, Marcus couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. What had started as a single program designed to help a few young people from underrepresented communities was now influencing public policy on a national scale. It was a testament to the power of persistence and the belief that one person could make a difference. As Marcus prepared to speak at a press conference to announce the new partnership, he took a moment to reflect on his journey. He thought back to the early days when the Opportunity Initiative was just an idea, to the many challenges he had faced, and to the countless people who had supported him along the way. He had never imagined that it would grow into something so transformative. He had set out to change the lives of a few, but in doing so, he had set a much larger force into motion. The press conference was a huge success. The announcement of the new policy integration was met with applause and excitement from both the public and private sectors. The Opportunity Initiative was no longer just a program. It was now a cornerstone of national efforts to create equality and opportunity. As Marcus addressed the media, he spoke not only of the success they had achieved, but of the work that still lay ahead. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We have made tremendous progress, but there is still much work to do. We are at a crossroads in history, and we have the chance to build a future where opportunity is not determined by your background, but by your potential. Together, we can create a world where every person has the chance to succeed, no matter where they come from." The applause that followed was loud and enthusiastic, but Marcus wasn't focused on the praise. He was focused on the work that still needed to be done, the lives that still needed to be changed. And as he looked out over the room, he knew that the Opportunity Initiative had only just begun to make its mark on the world. The journey was far from over, and he was ready for whatever came next. As Marcus left the press conference, a sense of calm settled over him. He had built something incredible, something that would outlast him. The Opportunity Initiative had grown into a movement that had the power to change lives, industries, and the world itself. The future was bright, and Marcus was more determined than ever to see it through. He knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but he was ready to face it, because the work was worth it. The world was changing, and Marcus was proud to be part of that change, helping to shape a future where everyone, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to succeed. Asterisk, asterisk.